The easiest lie to believe is the one planted by someone wearing a badge. The Courthouse Plaza in downtown Baltimore had barely settled into the rhythm of a cool Thursday morning when dozens of attorneys, clerks, reporters, and citizens streamed through the wide granite entrance beneath the towering columns. Coffee cups steamed in nervous hands, security officers directed the growing crowd, and television crews quietly prepared for another day of hearings that most people assumed would be routine. Standing among them was Ava Brooks, a respected black prosecutor whose calm presence had earned admiration throughout the state for taking on public corruption cases that few others were willing to touch. She wore a navy business suit, carried a leather briefcase tucked beneath one arm, and walked with the quiet confidence of someone who believed justice was measured by patience rather than volume. She acknowledged familiar faces with a polite smile before climbing the courthouse steps, never noticing that another pair of eyes had been following her since she crossed the street. Officer Ethan Walker adjusted the radio on his shoulder and watched her with the certainty of a man convinced he already knew her story before she spoke a single word. To him, appearances confirmed assumptions, and assumptions had become something he trusted more than evidence. He stepped forward just as Ava reached the security checkpoint. "Ma'am, I need you to stop for a moment," he said loudly enough that nearby conversations faded into silence. Ava stopped immediately and turned toward him with composed professionalism. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked evenly. Walker ignored the question. Instead, he circled her with deliberate confidence while curious strangers slowed their pace to watch. A courthouse visitor quietly lifted a phone, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Another whispered to a companion. Within seconds, a small audience had formed without anyone realizing they were about to witness the beginning of something far larger than an ordinary stop. Walker requested identification. Ava calmly handed over her prosecutor credentials. He barely glanced at them, before returning his attention to her handbag and coat pockets. "I'm going to need to conduct a search," he announced. "On what grounds?" Ava asked, never raising her voice. "Suspicious behavior," he replied. The words floated through the cold morning air, vague enough to sound official yet hollow enough to leave several observers exchanging uncertain looks. Ava slowly placed her briefcase on the stone ledge beside the entrance, and folded her hands in front of her. "I won't interfere," she said quietly. "Please proceed." Her unexpected calm seemed to unsettle everyone except Walker, who interpreted her silence as surrender. As he moved closer, his body briefly blocked the view of those standing nearby. His hand disappeared behind the edge of her coat for only a heartbeat before returning just as smoothly. No one reacted. It happened too quickly. A second later, Walker reached into the same pocket once more and withdrew a small plastic package. He held it high enough for everyone around them to see. Gasps spread across the entrance. Cameras immediately turned toward the scene. Murmurs raced through the growing crowd like wind across dry leaves. Reporters instinctively reached for microphones while courthouse employees froze in disbelief. Walker's expression hardened into quiet satisfaction. "Looks like we've found something important," he declared. Every lens focused on Ava, expecting panic, excuses, or outrage. Instead, she simply looked at the package, then back into Walker's eyes with an expression so calm it almost seemed out of place. "Are you finished, officer?" she asked softly. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across more than one face, because while everyone else believed they had just watched a prosecutor's career collapse, Ava Brooks seemed to be waiting for something that had not happened yet. A hush settled over the courthouse entrance as the whispers grew louder with every passing second. Some people stepped back while others leaned forward, eager to witness what they believed was another public disgrace unfolding before their eyes. Reporters quietly exchanged glances, already imagining the headlines that would dominate the evening news. A respected prosecutor accused of carrying illegal drugs was the kind of story that spread faster than facts ever could. Officer Ethan Walker carefully sealed the small package inside an evidence bag, making sure everyone watching could see each movement. His confidence seemed almost rehearsed, as though he had already imagined exactly how this morning would end. "You have the right to remain silent," he began in a measured voice, but Ava Brooks simply nodded before he could continue. She did not interrupt him. She did not argue. She did not demand special treatment despite carrying credentials that identified her as an officer of the court. Instead, she stood perfectly still beneath the cool autumn sunlight, her expression unchanged while camera shutters clicked from every direction. Several courthouse employees looked away, uncomfortable with what they were seeing. Others quietly assumed the evidence must be genuine. After all, why would a police officer risk fabricating something in front of so many witnesses? That single assumption settled over the crowd like a heavy fog. Walker asked another officer to inventory Ava's belongings. Her briefcase was placed on a nearby table beside her phone, legal files, and a neatly organized planner filled with handwritten notes. Everything appeared ordinary. There was nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, nothing except the package now resting inside the transparent evidence bag. "Do you wish to explain this?" Walker asked, raising it slightly. Ava looked directly at him without blinking. "No," she answered calmly. The simplicity of her response caught several people off guard. A television reporter quietly lowered her microphone, expecting a denial or emotional reaction that never came. One young law student standing near the courthouse doors whispered, "Why is she so calm?" No one had an answer. Walker interpreted her silence as resignation. The corners of his mouth lifted ever so slightly before he instructed another officer to escort her toward a patrol vehicle waiting nearby. As they walked across the plaza, dozens of phones continued recording every step. Ava noticed them but never acknowledged the cameras. Her attention remained fixed ahead, almost as though she were carefully counting each second rather than each step. Near the security entrance, an older courthouse custodian frowned as he replayed something in his memory. He had watched Walker approach Ava only moments earlier, and for an instant he remembered seeing the officer shift unusually close before announcing the search. The memory felt insignificant, almost impossible to explain, yet it refused to disappear. Inside the courthouse lobby, another prosecutor stared through the glass doors with growing concern. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. Ava had always been known for preparing every detail before entering a courtroom. She never relied on luck, and she never walked into a difficult situation without a reason. That reputation suddenly felt impossible to ignore. As the patrol vehicle door opened, Walker appeared completely satisfied that the morning belonged to him. He believed the cameras had captured proof of his professionalism, the witnesses had confirmed his version of events, and public opinion had already chosen its side. What he never noticed was the tiny black pin attached neatly to the lapel of Ava's blazer, still resting exactly where it had been since sunrise, silently recording every word, every movement, and every second that everyone else believed had already been forgotten. The patrol vehicle pulled away from the courthouse with steady precision, leaving behind a crowd that had already begun constructing its own version of the truth. Inside the vehicle, the silence felt heavier than the sound of the engine. Officer Ethan Walker occasionally glanced into the rearview mirror, expecting to see frustration or fear reflected in Ava Brooks's face. Instead, she sat upright with her hands resting comfortably in her lap, her breathing slow and controlled, as though she were traveling to another ordinary meeting rather than being taken into custody. Walker finally broke the silence. "You should have thought about your career before making a mistake like this." Ava slowly turned her eyes toward the passing city streets outside the window. "My career has always depended on evidence," she replied quietly. "Nothing else." Walker let out a faint laugh, convinced that confidence would soon disappear once the formal investigation began. What he could not understand was why she had never once asked to contact a supervisor, why she had not demanded legal representation immediately, and why she had shown almost no interest in defending herself in front of the dozens of cameras outside the courthouse. Every suspect he had encountered wanted to explain, protest, or bargain. Ava had done none of those things. At police headquarters, the morning routine continued with practiced efficiency. Officers moved through the halls carrying reports and coffee while dispatch radios echoed from distant offices. News of the arrest had already begun spreading through the building, drawing curious looks as Ava entered under escort. Some recognized her immediately. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances, remembering cases they had seen her prosecute with remarkable professionalism. Others simply assumed that no prosecutor could be standing there unless overwhelming evidence existed. Assumptions, Ava had learned years earlier, often reached their destination long before facts ever caught up. During the intake process, an evidence technician carefully documented every item removed from her belongings. Her identification, her planner, her courtroom notes, her reading glasses, her phone. Each object was photographed, labeled, and placed into separate containers according to department policy. The technician noticed the small black pin attached neatly to the lapel of her blazer. "Would you like me to remove this accessory as well?" he asked politely. Ava looked at the pin for only a moment before answering. "Please document it exactly as you found it." The technician nodded without giving the request much thought. To him, it appeared to be nothing more than a decorative accessory worn by a professional attorney. As he completed the inventory, another detective quietly entered the room carrying a folder. Detective Rachel Monroe had worked alongside prosecutors for years and knew Ava by reputation. She studied the paperwork, then looked toward Walker standing confidently near the doorway. Something about the sequence of events felt unusually clean, almost too convenient. Rachel had investigated enough misconduct cases to recognize that certainty without scrutiny often created its own warning signs. Before leaving the room, Ava calmly addressed the evidence technician one final time. "Please make sure every digital recording connected to today's events is preserved according to departmental policy." The request sounded routine, almost procedural, and no one questioned it. Walker certainly did not. He believed every camera that mattered had already confirmed his success. He walked out of the room convinced the hardest part of his day was over. Behind him, the tiny black pin remained carefully logged into evidence, silent, unnoticed, and still carrying a complete record of a morning that had not unfolded the way he believed. Detective Rachel Monroe remained in the evidence room long after everyone else had returned to their assignments. The paperwork in front of her appeared complete, every signature neatly placed, every inventory form properly filed, yet something refused to fit. Experience had taught her that the strongest cases rarely depended on a single dramatic discovery. They were built from small details that quietly contradicted the obvious. She reopened the evidence log and compared the recorded timeline with the courthouse incident report. The numbers matched perfectly, almost too perfectly. Outside her office, news stations were already replaying footage captured by bystanders. Every broadcast showed the same carefully framed moment: Officer Ethan Walker holding up the evidence bag while a respected prosecutor stood silently beside him. Commentators debated reputation, accountability, and public trust without realizing they were discussing only a few seconds taken from a much longer story. Across town, courthouse employees continued talking about the arrest in elevators, hallways, and conference rooms. Some insisted the evidence spoke for itself. Others struggled to reconcile what they had witnessed with the woman they had known for years. One assistant district attorney quietly remembered a conversation with Ava only 2 weeks earlier. During a training seminar on public integrity investigations, Ava had spoken about the importance of preserving every available recording, explaining that cameras often captured details human memory overlooked. At the time, it had sounded like practical legal advice. Now those words carried unexpected weight. Back at headquarters, Walker accepted congratulations from a few colleagues who believed he had removed corruption from the justice system. Their praise came easily because they had only seen the public version of the morning. Walker himself appeared more confident than ever. He completed his incident report with precise language, carefully describing probable cause, the search, and the discovery of the package. Every sentence supported the narrative he intended investigators to believe. Before submitting the report, he read it one final time and smiled with quiet satisfaction. Meanwhile, Rachel requested access to every available recording connected to the courthouse entrance. Traffic cameras, exterior security systems, nearby business surveillance. She expected a routine review that would simply confirm the official report. Even so, procedure demanded thoroughness, and procedure had become something she trusted more than assumptions. While waiting for the files to upload, she noticed one additional inventory entry attached to Ava Brooks's personal property. A small recording accessory had been documented during intake exactly as requested by the evidence technician. The description was brief and unremarkable, causing most readers to skip over it without a second thought. Rachel paused. She remembered Ava's unusually specific request to preserve every digital recording connected to the incident. Most people under investigation focused on defending themselves. Ava had focused on preserving evidence. Those were not the priorities of someone acting out of panic. They were the priorities of someone who expected the truth to survive careful examination. Rachel leaned back in her chair, looking through the office window toward the busy hallway outside. For the first time all day, she stopped asking whether the prosecutor had hidden something. Instead, she began asking whether someone else had been counting on everyone looking in the wrong direction. As the first surveillance files slowly loaded onto her computer screen, the quiet confidence that had surrounded Walker since morning began to feel less like certainty, and more like the calm that often comes just before an unexpected truth changes everything. The first surveillance file opened without ceremony, showing nothing more than the wide entrance to the courthouse from a fixed camera mounted high above the front steps. Detective Rachel Monroe watched the recording at normal speed, then again at half speed, refusing to let the growing pressure around the case influence what she saw. Hundreds of people crossed the plaza that morning. Attorneys carrying briefcases. Families arriving for hearings. Journalists setting up cameras. Security officers greeting familiar faces. Then Ava Brooks appeared, walking exactly as every witness had described, calm, focused, and completely unaware that dozens of lives were about to intersect in a single moment. Rachel paused the video as Officer Ethan Walker entered the frame. From the elevated angle, the interaction looked ordinary. He approached with confidence, spoke briefly, and positioned himself between Ava and the surrounding crowd before beginning the search. Nothing immediately contradicted his report. Yet something about his movement drew Rachel's attention. She replayed the same 6 seconds again, this time frame by frame. Walker shifted his body slightly to the left, briefly blocking the security camera's view of his hands before stepping back into full view. It lasted less than 2 seconds, so quickly that anyone watching in real time would never have noticed. Rachel marked the timestamp and opened footage from a nearby traffic camera across the street. The angle was different, farther away but slightly higher. This recording showed the same encounter from another perspective. Again she slowed the playback. Again Walker's body shielded his hands for an instant. It was still impossible to see exactly what happened, but the synchronized recordings confirmed one important fact. There had been a moment that no single public camera captured completely. Rachel quietly requested additional video from neighboring businesses facing the courthouse plaza. Minutes later another file arrived from a small coffee shop located across the sidewalk. The image quality was lower, but its position filled part of the blind spot created by Walker's body. Rachel leaned closer to the screen. She could now see Walker's right shoulder move toward Ava before the official search began, although his hand still disappeared behind his own body for a fraction of a second. It was not proof of misconduct. It was not proof of innocence. It was simply another missing piece refusing to fit neatly into the official narrative. At that same moment, the evidence technician delivered the inventoried recording accessory from Ava's personal belongings to the digital forensics unit as part of standard preservation procedures. No one treated it as urgent because no one yet understood its significance. The technician simply followed policy, signed the transfer form, and continued with the rest of the day's workload. Rachel watched the surveillance clips one final time before quietly closing her notebook. Every available camera had revealed something different, yet none had told the complete story by itself. That realization reminded her of something an old instructor once said during investigative training. The truth rarely hides because there are no witnesses. It hides because every witness sees only one angle. Rachel stood, walked toward the digital forensics office, and asked a simple question that no one else had thought to ask all day. Has anyone reviewed the recording from the device collected with Ms. Brooks's property? The room fell silent for a brief moment before a technician shook his head. "Not yet," he answered. Rachel nodded slowly. "Then let us start there." In another office down the hall, Walker finished his paperwork believing the evidence had already secured his version of events, completely unaware that the smallest item logged into evidence was about to become the most important witness in the entire investigation. The digital forensics laboratory was unusually quiet as the evidence technician connected the small recording device to a secure workstation. Detective Rachel Monroe stood beside the monitor with folded arms while the progress bar slowly moved across the screen. Around them, no one expected a dramatic discovery. Most assumed the device would contain routine courtroom notes, or harmless background audio from an ordinary workday. Even the technician spoke with casual confidence. "If there is anything useful, we should know in a few minutes." Rachel simply nodded, never taking her eyes off the display. Down the hall, Ava Brooks remained seated in a private interview room. She had been offered water, allowed to review procedural documents, and informed of the next administrative steps. Throughout the afternoon, she answered every question politely but never volunteered unnecessary explanations. Her composure puzzled nearly everyone who encountered her. One young officer quietly asked another how someone facing such serious accusations could remain so calm. The older officer shrugged. "Either she has accepted what is coming, or she knows something the rest of us do not." Meanwhile, Ethan Walker walked through the department with the confidence of a man whose version of events had already been accepted. Colleagues greeted him with approving nods, and a supervisor briefly congratulated him for what appeared to be a professional arrest involving a public official. Walker thanked them modestly, careful not to appear overly proud, yet inside he believed the difficult part of the day had ended. He trusted the paperwork, the witnesses, and the public attention to reinforce his report. He never once asked whether every available recording had been preserved. Back inside the laboratory, the first video file finally appeared on the monitor. The recording began long before the encounter outside the courthouse. Ava walked steadily along the sidewalk while greeting familiar courthouse employees with quiet professionalism. The image remained stable as she climbed the courthouse steps and approached the entrance. Rachel immediately noticed the perspective. The camera was positioned high on Ava's lapel, providing a clear forward view while also capturing crisp audio. Every conversation, every movement, and every pause unfolded naturally without interruption. The technician increased the volume as Walker entered the frame. His opening remarks matched the official report almost perfectly, but Rachel paid closer attention to the seconds before the search officially began. She watched Walker step closer than necessary while briefly moving outside the direct line of sight of nearby witnesses. "Pause it," Rachel said softly. The technician froze the frame. They replayed the sequence one frame at a time. The body camera did not provide a complete view of Walker's hands because of their positions, yet it revealed something the public recordings had never captured. Before announcing the search, Walker deliberately adjusted his stance and looked over both shoulders, briefly scanning the crowd as though confirming where everyone was standing. It lasted only a moment, but it was a movement completely absent from his written report. Rachel requested another replay. This time she focused not only on what appeared on the screen but also on what could be heard through the microphone. Footsteps echoed across the stone plaza. Conversations drifted through the morning air. Then came the faint rustle of clothing followed by the nearly inaudible sound of plastic brushing against fabric just before Walker announced that he was beginning the search. The room remained silent after the playback ended. No one rushed to conclusions because the recording alone did not answer every question. Instead, it transformed certainty into doubt. Rachel looked toward the technician and spoke with quiet conviction. "Synchronize this recording with every surveillance camera we collected today. If every second matches the timeline, the truth will not depend on assumptions anymore. It will depend on evidence." The synchronization process took less than an hour, but for everyone inside the digital forensics laboratory, it felt much longer. For separate recordings now appeared across a single monitor. The courthouse security camera, the traffic camera across the street, the coffee shop surveillance system, and the small Recording device recovered from Ava Brooks's blazer. Detective Rachel Monroe instructed the technician to align every file to the exact fraction of a second using the courthouse clock visible in the background. As the timelines locked together, every movement became part of one continuous story instead of 4 isolated perspectives. The room grew silent. Even the technicians who had been casually discussing other cases stopped what they were doing and turned toward the screen. Rachel pressed play. Ava approached the courthouse exactly as before, greeting familiar faces with the same calm professionalism. Walker entered from the opposite side of the plaza with deliberate confidence. His first words matched his written report. His posture matched the public videos. For several seconds, everything appeared ordinary. Then Rachel slowed the playback to 1/4 speed. On the traffic camera, Walker shifted slightly to his left. On the coffee shop camera, his shoulder briefly blocked the view. On the courthouse camera, several bystanders unknowingly stepped into the line of sight. But on Ava's recording, the microphone captured every subtle movement. The faint sound of clothing brushing together came first. Then, for less than a second, the angle changed just enough to reveal Walker's hand moving toward the outside pocket of Ava's coat before he announced any search. Rachel immediately paused the recording. No one spoke. The technician replayed the same second again, this time enlarging the image and matching it frame by frame with the other cameras. The individual recordings had hidden the action behind different blind spots, but together they removed those blind spots entirely. The combined timeline showed Walker reaching toward Ava before he claimed to have discovered anything. A quiet gasp escaped from one investigator standing near the doorway. Rachel remained composed, refusing to jump ahead of the evidence. "Continue," she said softly. The recordings advanced. Walker formally announced the search, only after his hand had already moved away from Ava's pocket. Seconds later he reached into that same pocket and displayed the plastic package to the crowd. Suddenly, every unexplained detail from the morning fit together with remarkable clarity. Ava's unusual calm. Her request to preserve every recording. The careful inventory of the recording device. Even the questions Rachel could never quite dismiss. None of them had been acts of confidence without reason. They had been acts of patience. Rachel quietly leaned back from the monitor. "Create verified copies of every synchronized recording," she instructed. "Document the chain of custody and notify internal affairs immediately." No one argued. No one questioned the decision. The evidence spoke with a consistency that paperwork alone never could. Down the hallway, Ava remained seated in the same interview room where she had spent the afternoon waiting. The door opened, and Rachel stepped inside carrying a simple folder rather than a stack of accusations. Their eyes met for the first time since the investigation had begun. Ava searched Rachel's expression for only a moment before offering a faint, knowing smile. Rachel returned it with quiet respect. "You never tried to convince anyone," she said. Ava folded her hands and answered in the same steady voice she had carried since the courthouse steps. "Because the truth does not become stronger when you argue with it. It becomes stronger when you give it the chance to be seen." By early evening, the atmosphere inside police headquarters had changed completely. Conversations that had once carried quiet confidence were replaced by careful whispers behind partially closed office doors. Internal affairs investigators arrived without unnecessary attention, carrying sealed evidence cases and documented copies of every synchronized recording. Detective Rachel Monroe personally transferred the files, verifying each signature and every timestamp before the review began. Nothing was rushed. Every procedure followed department policy because the integrity of the evidence mattered as much as the evidence itself. In another conference room, senior officials watched the synchronized recordings unfold on a large display. No dramatic speeches interrupted the presentation. No one argued over opinions. The recordings spoke in precise, chronological order, each camera filling the gaps left by the others until the complete sequence became impossible to ignore. The room remained silent long after the final frame disappeared. One supervisor slowly closed the incident report that Ethan Walker had submitted only hours earlier. The written narrative no longer matched the verified timeline preserved across multiple independent recordings. The difference was not based on speculation. It was based on evidence that could be reviewed repeatedly from every available angle. Walker was asked to enter the conference room. At first he appeared composed, expecting another routine discussion about media attention surrounding the arrest. He greeted several supervisors with professional confidence before noticing the synchronized recordings paused on the display behind them. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. An internal affairs investigator calmly explained that additional evidence had been reviewed and that several inconsistencies required immediate clarification. Walker looked toward the screen but offered no immediate response. The recordings began playing once again. This time he watched the same moments that everyone else had already seen. Every camera supported the same timeline. Every synchronized second narrowed the space between assumption and fact. When the playback ended, no one raised a voice. The lead investigator simply informed Walker that the original arrest would undergo formal review and that, pending the outcome of the investigation, he was being relieved of active duty responsibilities according to departmental procedure. Across the building, Ava Brooks received a quiet update from Detective Rachel Monroe. "The evidence has been independently verified," Rachel said. "The investigation is moving forward exactly as it should." Ava listened without celebration. She thanked Rachel for following the evidence instead of public opinion. "Justice only works," Ava replied gently, "when people are willing to question what appears obvious." As night settled over Baltimore, local news stations began reporting that new evidence had emerged, prompting an official review of the highly publicized Courthouse incident. Earlier broadcasts had focused on accusation. Now the coverage centered on verification, accountability, and the importance of preserving objective evidence before reaching conclusions. Public conversation shifted almost as quickly as it had begun that morning. The same recordings that once seemed to confirm one story now revealed a far more complete one. Rachel stood outside headquarters for a brief moment, watching city lights reflect across the wet pavement after a passing drizzle. She realized the case had never depended on one extraordinary witness or one emotional argument. It had depended on ordinary people doing their jobs carefully, preserving every recording, documenting every detail, and allowing patience to uncover what haste had overlooked. Inside the building, the investigation continued through established legal channels, while the truth that had quietly waited inside a small recording device finally stepped into the light where it belonged. The following Monday morning, the courthouse looked exactly as it had 1 week earlier. The same stone steps welcomed attorneys carrying case files. The same security officers greeted visitors with quiet professionalism. Reporters still gathered near the entrance, although this time they waited for a very different story. The investigation had continued through established legal channels, supported by verified recordings, documented evidence, and independent review. Every conclusion had followed procedure rather than public pressure, reminding everyone involved that accountability carried meaning only when it was built on facts instead of assumptions. Ava Brooks returned to work without requesting special recognition or public statements. She walked through the courthouse doors carrying the same leather briefcase, wearing the same composed expression that had never abandoned her even during the most difficult hours of the investigation. Colleagues who had once struggled to understand her silence now greeted her with quiet respect. Some offered brief words of encouragement. Others simply nodded, recognizing that no speech could adequately replace what patience and truth had already accomplished. Detective Rachel Monroe watched from across the lobby before approaching Ava with a warm but professional smile. "The review is expanding," Rachel said. "Several previous cases are being examined to ensure every outcome met the same standard of integrity." Ava nodded thoughtfully. "If that helps restore confidence in the system," she replied, "then every difficult moment was worth enduring." Rachel paused before asking the question that had remained with her since the investigation began. "How did you stay so calm when everyone believed the worst?" Ava looked toward the courthouse ceiling where sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows before answering. "Because panic never strengthens the truth," she said softly. "Evidence does." Those simple words stayed with Rachel long after their conversation ended. Later that afternoon, the official findings were released. Department leadership confirmed that the investigation had relied on authenticated recordings, documented timelines, and established legal procedures. Administrative actions were taken based on those findings, reinforcing the principle that no individual, regardless of position, stood above accountability when the evidence pointed in another direction. News organizations updated their earlier reports, emphasizing not only the corrected facts but also the importance of preserving complete recordings before reaching public conclusions. Commentators who had once rushed to judgment now spoke about due process, careful investigation, and the responsibility carried by every person entrusted with public authority. The courthouse gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm, yet something invisible had changed. Employees looked at one another with renewed appreciation for the systems designed to protect both the public and those serving within the justice system. Cameras remained mounted above entrances. Evidence continued to be documented. Procedures remained the same. The difference was that more people now understood why every detail mattered. As the sun settled behind the Baltimore skyline, Ava stepped outside the courthouse and paused at the top of the granite staircase. The evening breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic through the city while the last rays of light reflected across the courthouse windows. She looked neither triumphant nor bitter. She simply continued walking toward the future with the same quiet dignity she had carried from the beginning. Because she understood something that many people only discover after life tests them. A uniform can command attention. A title can command respect. But only the truth can endure every question. And when truth is preserved with patience, integrity, and courage, it does not need to raise its voice. It simply waits for the moment when every shadow moves aside, allowing justice to be seen exactly as it has always been.